From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Unconquered with Doc Staples. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price, by Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, by Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, and by Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Look, time to buy a house. Give Justin a call. If you're doing it in the greater Jacksonville area, give Lewis a call. If you are selling your house, give Lewis a call. Same if you're in the Research Triangle of North Carolina with Shenandoah. They've been great partners with me. Make sure that you give them all a look. Now, well, honestly, that could have gone a whole lot worse. Clemson beats Florida State 29-13 at Florida State. But you walk away from this feeling like there's actually a little bit of hope in certain areas and some, little flashes of light here and there that you haven't really seen so far. So, I mean, it could have been a lot worse. You could have come out of this game saying, well, there's not a whole lot of hope for the future. But you look at this game and, Clemson dominated this football game. First of all, I mean, that's obvious. Total yards, 500 to 250. I mean, it's a 2-to-1 gap in total yards. 6.8 yards per play to 3.9. So not quite a double yards per play, but I mean, close to it. And then just a little bit more than doubling up on the scoreboard. So, I mean, Clemson dominated this game. There's no doubt about that. Nevertheless, if you're looking at this from, a glass half full perspective, you say, okay, yeah, only 250 yards total, but Brock Glenn, 23 of 41, 228 yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception that was not actually on him, that was on the wide receiver, apparently. I need to go back and take a closer look at it, but the receiver is supposed to be on the inside there and stayed vertical, and Glenn threw where he was supposed to go. So, not bad, 23 of 41 for 228 and 2 touchdowns, and a couple of really nice touchdowns down in the red zone. I mean, frankly, if he'd been playing against Boston College, end of the half there, where DJU airmails a couple throws in the end zone, Brock Glenn appears to be a guy that hits those throws. Florida State probably wins that football game. In fact, Florida State's probably 3-1. Or, say 3-2 coming into this game, maybe 4-1 coming into this game if Glenn had played all year. That's my view. And, Norvell and staff do have to explain a little bit more of why they never actually gave him a look. I understand, and I've explained why DJU kept starting. You have to go based on what you see in practice. You have to go, as a coach, you have to go based on how guys are grading out. And when, one guy is just not playing as well consistently in practice and the other guy is just better in practice, you have to keep that in mind. You have to take account of that. But then when the guy that's playing a little bit better or a lot better in practice is really dropping the ball during the game, then I think you have to make changes. Sometimes just to get that guy on the sideline and give him a little bit of a different perspective. But they didn't do that. I mean, I wanted him to do that, at the halftime mark of the Boston College game, or of the Georgia Tech game. Then I wanted him to do it again, about midway through the BC game, or midway through the first half. There's a certain point where, the feeling among most people who watch these games was you got to give him at least a few drives just to give an opportunity to see something else at quarterback. And then beyond that, just see if there's a spark in terms of the offense. And I thought Glenn did largely spark this offense. He provided it was a breath of fresh air at times where he was able to push the ball downfield. He was able to maybe the biggest thing was he was able to escape some pressure a couple times and make some plays with his legs. 5 carries for 15 yards total, and that includes 2 sacks for minus 10 yards. So, I mean, That's 25 rushing yards outside of those 2 sacks. So, and also showed just some moxie in different places. I thought there was a lot of positives there, or were a lot of positives. There were also other positives. The 2 main guys that did damage as receivers were Landon Thomas, 8 targets, 7 catches for 80 yards, and looked good doing it. Hakeem Williams, 4 catches on 4 targets for 53 yards. Now, he had the 1 fumble, but looked good doing it. Getting those guys involved is really, really important. But ultimately, you look at only 228 passing yards, but then you start to ask, okay, how many yards were left on the field because of penalties or drops that were not on Brock Glenn? And you go, well, there's at least 2 50-yarders that are, or probable 50-yarders that were dropped. There's a 40-yarder that was a holding penalty. So now you're over 300 yards passing. And this is a team that hasn't gone over 300 yards all season total. So there's your real positive. And again, this is one where Norvell's going to have to do some explaining and really just take ownership of not having made that change or giving some in-game opportunities to Brock Glenn, despite the fact that the quarterback position was a real problem through those games. And, I think at this point, he's going to have to acknowledge that that was a mistake, that he needed to at least give some opportunities there. And as I understood it, I got a phone call this morning that said that they were planning on playing both Brock Glenn and Luke Krummenhoek in this game. But I think actually Brock played well enough that they decided to just keep rolling with him in this. And again, those numbers aren't going to knock you dead. 23 of 41 for 228 and 2 scores and that 1 pick. It's not, that's not Heisman quality quarterback play, but it's definitely, you can win with that. Like that's, if Brock Glenn plays like this against Duke, they can beat Duke, should beat Duke. It's crazy that we're at the point where the question is again asking, like 5 years ago, whether a Florida State team can or should beat Duke. But you can do those things. And by the way, the other one that probably should have gone for another 50 yards that was dropped was by Mekhi Danzy. That's another opportunity that was missed. And that, again, you're looking at 350 yards or so total, and maybe 140 or so yards that was left on the field of good throws by Brock Glenn. So that's the biggest positive coming out of this, is that you might have a passing game. You might actually have a quarterback that can move your offense if you can get some guys that can actually catch the football. And what a breath of fresh air it was to have Landon Thomas and Amari Williams actually catch the football, with Amari Williams catching it in the end zone there. He, caught caught one of the 2 targets that he had for 13 yards in that score. And then obviously Landon Thomas really looking good with those 7 catches. The offense suddenly looked very different with those guys out there. Now, the big problem is that you still have no semblance of a running game. Lawrence Toafili, 10 carries, 16 yards, 1.6 yards per carry. Cam Davis, 6 carries, 13 yards, 2.2 yards per carry. And the problems weren't really those backs. The backs weren't the problem. Problem is that they got nowhere to run because that offensive line is not good. They can't run block at all. And again, I just want to remind you that this Clemson team had given up 6.26 yards per carry to Georgia, 5.52 yards per carry to App State, 4.71 yards per carry to NC State, and 5.36 yards to Stanford. They had not given up fewer than 4.71 yards per carry to any team this year. And Florida State came in and averaged 1 yard per carry total. Now, sack adjusted, okay. You say, okay, well, what about sack adjusted? 1.5 yards per carry. And make it worse, they had 18 carries for 0 yards, exactly 0 yards through the third quarter. They averaged 0 yards per carry through the third quarter. That's not getting it done. And for a team that, and for a head coach and offensive coordinator who have always hung their hat on really being able to run the football, this is, and having an offense that is very much predicated on running the football, that's the problem. That's the real problem. They have not figured out how to put the pieces in place to be able to run the ball. Now, I did think actually they looked the best on the offensive line when Washington moved to right guard and Jalen Early was in at left tackle. Now, I don't think you can necessarily do that against every team and that'll hold up against the best edge rushers. Can't do that every series and all of that. But it looked to me like you could probably run block and do certain things the best with that group. Andre Otto had a bit of a mixed game, and he's the guy that got run over and got called for holding as he pulled the defensive tackle down on top of himself, or at least it looked like it, and that's why it got called on the long completion to Benson. But, looked good in a couple other cases, at least looks promising for the future once he, gets coached up. If they can coach the offensive lineman up at some point. But, they've got to figure something out offensively in terms of running game and in terms of being able to get guys just flat out blocked. And Maurice Smith cost them probably 40 yards in just bad snaps. And that, that's a 6th year senior that costs you, 17 yards with in terms of a bad snap that goes over the head that is not completed. Then another costs you a few yards, 5 or 6 yards with a tackle for loss. Then another one where it results in an incompletion that basically ends a drive. You can't have that from a 6th year senior. And I'll be blunt. The fact that you have to start Maurice Smith at center in year 5 is a bit of an indictment on the recruiting and development at that position in year 5. And they're going to have to reevaluate kind of what they're doing moving forward at that spot. You can't be in year 5 and having 18 carries for 0 yards through 3 quarters. I don't care who you're playing against. It's Florida State. That's not acceptable. And that's not a quarterback problem. That's not a running back problem. That just comes straight down to you don't have guys that are blocking worth anything. And you're going to have to evaluate that part of your team. Again, but the real positive, like I said, the positive is that it looks like you might just be able to, with Brock Glenn, to some degree, just line up and chuck the ball. I mean, maybe at this point, the right decision, and the crazy thing is that this is so counter to everything that was expected coming into this year. What we talked about coming into this year is you go a little bit bigger. You're kind of trying to limit how much your wide receivers, which is not a great group, as we've seen, how much they are asked to do. So you go to more, 2-back type sets and you pound the rock in 12 personnel, one tight end, 2 backs. You pound the rock, you pound the rock, you pound the rock, and you go downfield. And at this point, I mean, I'm going into the open date that comes after this Clemson game. I'm going into this open date saying, I've got to completely retool my offense to go essentially air raid the rest of the year. To go empty, 1 back, or 1 back with a 11 personnel, Landon Thomas out there, whatever. But essentially, basically duck and chuck, or chuck and duck, and make that my offense moving forward. Because right now, when Florida State runs the football, they're basically just lighting it down on fire. Like, all right, well, it's going to be 2nd and 12 or 2nd and 9 or whatever. And that's not because of the backs. Like I said, it's just because they can't block anybody. So maybe you just retool it and you say, okay, well, Brock Glenn has shown that he can actually get the ball out quickly enough. Let's just chuck and duck. Like, let's just see if we can ride trying to throw for 400 yards and live with the drops. So you throw on first down, you get a drop, and it's 2nd and 10. Well, that's where you'd have been anyway. But, once in a while you catch that ball and it's a 30-yard gain and you can start getting some chunk plays out of it. Maybe that's where you go. But at least there's some hope there. And like I said, the real hope is that the guys that made the plays on offense were young guys. Landon Thomas, Hakeem Williams. Cam Davis had a couple carries where, he, again, 6 carries for 13 yards isn't much, but if you look at how many yards after contact that was, it was pretty dang impressive. Amari Williams and Brock Glenn. It's a lot of youth with some positives there, and then a couple young guys on the offensive line playing. So that's the real positive coming out of this game on the offensive side. Now, on the defensive side, things are not quite so simple. But again, I thought this was one of the best defensive performances on the whole that Florida State has had. Now, you're grading on a curve here because this defense hasn't been very good most of the season. But on the whole, even though they gave up 500 yards, even though they gave up 6.8 yards per play, they bowed up in the red zone to the tune of, well, there were 6. Clemson had 6 trips into the red zone. That's no bueno. But that resulted in 12 points. That's 6 trips into the red zone, and they had 6 field goal attempts. And really, Clemson wasn't close to scoring a touchdown on any of those. You had maybe one end of the first half that you had a receiver get his sort of fingertips on the football and went through his hands, but that would have been a tough catch at any rate. So turned that into 6 field goal attempts, and he had 2 blocks on the field goals. I mean, if Clemson scores a normal rate of touchdowns in the red zone, this game is, it's not close. It's like 48-13 kind of game. But the defense took care of business in the red zone. And that kind of shows a little bit of what ails this defense to some degree. And that is, the more space this team is defending, the more problems they have. 3rd and Fuller is a legit problem right now. You look at 3rd down numbers and all of that, it's rough. Clemson was only 1 for 3 on 3rd down, but they still converted 40% of their 3rd down conversions in this game, 6-15. And there were a couple, 2nd and 20 type things that they were able to just convert on or put themselves in position for 3rd and short. This defense does not do a good enough job communicating on the back end, tackling on the back end, taking good angles on the back end, and it continually hurts them. They keep giving up chunk plays. And, when you look at this game, where this game was really won, Clemson had 10 chunk plays in the run game. 10. Florida State had 2. Cam Davis, a rush for 10 yards that had about 12 yards after contact. And then you had the Brock Glenn scramble for 10 yards to get the 4th and 9. It was a gutsy play. But Clemson had 10 rushes for 195 combined yards there. 10, 11, 14, 27, 11, 16, 10, 12, 59, 25. That was not all on the defensive line. A lot of these were a safety just not being there to hit the proper alley at the right angle. You had a backer in the wrong gap on a couple of them. You just keep having these problems. The other thing is six passes for 156 total yards. 57-yard touchdown, and then a 23-yard touchdown. 20, 24, 16, and 16. And again, these were not a matter of just guys being physically superior. That 57-yarder, the first score, it sort of typified Florida State's season. You have a safety who bit down on the over route, and you got your deep crosser there, and he bites on that, even though he should know that post coming over top is his primary responsibility. He realizes too late, oh, I got to get back there. So he got nosy. Now he realizes too late that he's got to get back there. And then not only does he not make a good play on the ball, but he makes a weak, soft attempt to tackle, bounces off the receiver, and then succeeds in taking out the corner, who also made kind of a half-hearted effort to break up the pass at that point. And that's one of those where if you're the corner and the receiver has that much space to make the catch, you should be coming in and vigorously committing pass interference when you see that ball's thrown where that was. You come up and you tackle him before he gets the football. But instead, soft play by both defensive backs, and the safety takes out the corner. Not a great play by Hussey and by 23 on that. Not very good. And frankly, as much as there was talk about Fentrell Cypress really turning the corner this year in camp, I haven't seen it in games. Just hasn't shown up. But, again, the thing you got to give him credit for is when things got down in the red zone, the defensive line, they did their stuff. Backers in general did pretty well in this game, I thought. On the whole, it looked to me like Blake Nicholson and Cam Riley and also Omar Graham. Omar Graham had a nice pass breakup. He had what I think might be his first 8 tackles of the season, including 4 solo. Those 3 backers actually played pretty well as a whole in this one. Justin Cryer played pretty well. Now, Graham and Kelly were out of, Graham and Riley were out of gaps a couple times, I think. And I need to go back and look at it more closely. But on the whole, the backer play has improved as the season has gone on. Edwin Joseph continues to be in position to make plays, continues to play really hard, real positives there. There are a lot of positives. But quite frankly, the way that you continue to have communication problems and problems with basic match and read concepts on the back end just continues to highlight that in terms of coordination, various aspects of your defense being coordinated in the sense of what that word means, that's still a problem. And the safety position, which is actually the coordinator's ostensible responsibility there, continues to be the heart of that problem. Now, you've got some young guys that are playing there. KJ Kirkland played a lot. Got absolutely run expletive over in the when he came up to make a tackle and played soft there. And then, Hussey, young player, also had some soft moments and continues to be a bit of a problem coming up. He's one of the primary problems, might be the primary problem on some of those runs that hit a little bit when they bounce. It's a guy that just keeps coming down late and does not seem all that interested in coming hard and playing physical football. He's got to start playing physical. At a certain point, maybe you put Edwin Joseph there. That guy's going to hit somebody at least. But they got to figure some of that out. And they've got to figure out, they're going to have to figure out what they want to do in terms of the defense as a whole and in terms of, how they're going to coach safeties and everything else moving forward. But there was more positive, again, than negative on the defensive side in a lot of ways, despite the fact that they gave up 500 yards. There was a lot more life in this game. Generally guys played hard and played for each other in this game in ways that, they didn't they haven't always done this year. Just too many breakdowns, as was expected. I mean, this was what I thought might happen. I thought this would be a competitive game, even into the fourth quarter, and it was. And I thought, Florida State would give themselves a chance, at least to potentially scare Clemson. And they didn't really scare them, but they were able to limit them in certain respects, and mostly in the red zone. But again, you shouldn't be in a position at Florida State in year 5 where you're essentially playing bend but don't break, let him get into the red zone and roll the dice, play red zone roulette. But I mean, they played red zone roulette really well in this game. But yeah, still a lot of things that need to be worked on there. I do get the sense that moving forward on this schedule, this is a team that still can threaten or beat pretty much everybody on their schedule. Am I optimistic about Miami or Notre Dame? Absolutely not. Is Florida going to be a war too? One that you can't take for granted? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think there's anybody on this schedule that if you get some continued comfort and development at the quarterback position, and there were times where just on the whole, Brock Glenn looked more settled in and comfortable than DJU has at any point this season. If you can continue to get that at the quarterback position, then this is not going to be a 2-win team. This is going to be a team that's going to be able to, at least scare a bowl berth. And yeah, I know that's a far cry from what this team should be, but at least looking forward, they're going to be able to point to some growth and point to some young guys that give them hope for the future and can at least help them, show some proof of concept on certain things to recruits and say, look, we just are short players, short bodies at that spot. You're that guy. Maybe that's what they're going to need. But, I do think that in terms of what all the major visitors got to see recruiting wise, this at least was not a showing that embarrassed you. There was enough life there that they could go, yeah, they're not that far away. And right now, given how this season's gone, that's probably as much as you could ask for in this game. Go ahead and sign off there. Talk to you later this week at some point, but probably not as much this week as it would be otherwise. I'll probably just do one this week and maybe the film session because of the open date coming up. So I'll see you when I see you. Talk to you when I talk to you. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger, Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. I made this. Await my orders to launch a full-scale orgy of death right there on the desert floor. Not saying I'm gonna do it, but then again, I might.